Okay, everybody. My name is Vandy Dubre. I'm the Literature and Languages Librarian here at UT Tyler. And so I'm going to take some time today to step you through a little bit of the MLA style, especially since MLA has now come out with MLA 9. So we're going to walk through that a little bit. There's not a whole lot of difference between MLA 8 and MLA 9. You might want to ask your professor which one they're using currently, because we have some professors who haven't adopted to MLA 9. If you have any questions through here, feel free to pop them in the chat, or there'll be a time for question and answer at the end of the presentation. So to get started with MLA style, I went too far. It's important to note what MLA is saying, okay? Because those of us who were pre-MLA 8, we had everything lined out. You know, this is how you cite a journal article. This is how you cite a book. This is how you cite an encyclopedia entry. This is how you cite, a piece of in an edited work, an anthology. But with the internet and it growing as fast as it did, they were seeing a lot of complications with that, because we started adding in new things like blogs, vlogs, YouTube, streaming services, articles in databases, and all of those things came into play. So it got very confusing pretty quick between, this is a collection of, there was a historical set of slave narratives that were collected. The Library of Congress published them into a giant anthology set. And then they were hosted online by a company. So when we had to help a student try to cite that, it was, well, who does this belong to? It's, a narrative. So you've got the person who is giving that narrative. You've got the fact that it's in this anthology set that's done by the Library of Congress, but it's also hosted on this website. So that's where MLA sort of came together and said, listen, we've got to address this, but in a way that makes it so that we don't have to constantly dictate every single little thing, because as we know, now we have Twitter, Snapchat, all of these things are coming up. We can't always anticipate anymore what it's going to take. So the way MLA did that is they created containers. Okay, so you'll see through here, I will talk about container. The way I look at it is kind of like, what is holding what? Okay, so what I'm looking at, if I'm going to cite an article, a journal article, so this is my actual source, the article itself, but the article is contained within a journal. So that journal is my container number 1. Then if I'm just looking at that print journal, I can stop there. But what if that journal article I'm accessing through a database called JSTOR? So then the database is container number 2. Another way I like to look at it is like Russian nesting dolls. Typically, you see them as bigger and then they go down. I look at it in reverse. So here is my article. Here is my journal. That's container number 1, because the article is inside the journal. And both the article inside the journal is inside the database. Okay. And you can go so on and so forth. But that's what they mean by container. It's contained within this, which is then contained within a bigger piece. And not everything is going to have multiple layers. It's just you are providing that information to get your reader, or whoever is looking at your works cited page, everything they need in order to track that item down. Okay. I'm going to go back a couple of steps. Okay, so you see we have container. We also have the first piece. Okay, so these are kind of outside of the container. These are the actual pieces of the thing that I'm citing. Okay, so if I'm citing a journal article, I'm going to start with the author and the title of the article, the source I am pulling the information directly from. Now, whether that is a direct quotation or a paraphrasing of someone's idea, that has to be cited as well. But that would be where I'm pulling it from. If it's a chapter in a book, then I am pulling it from that specific chapter. So that chapter would be the title of my source. But then the book would be the container. Okay. You'll notice MLA has done a thing called the template of core elements. And what this does is it's a kind of a way to visualize, and also a kind of a way to, I don't want to say compartmentalize, but to be able to say, okay, this is here, these are the punctuations, and you can kind of lay it out to help you visualize what goes where. So you start out in MLA, you start out with the author, and the first author you have, it's going to start out with their last name. And then it's going to end with a period. If you'll notice in the template of core elements, the punctuation that you're supposed to have at the end of that piece is put in the template. So for the first container, we'll have the title of the container, comma, 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 all the way to the end. And that's something about MLA is, you know, that this piece ends with the period, just like a sentence ends with the period. Okay, so you have the author part. All of that ends at the period. Then you have the title of the source that ends with the period. Container number one, all the little pieces are separated by a comma, but I know that I'm done with container number one once I reach the period. Then if I start container number two, it's the same setup, and that would end with the period. Okay. We're going to step through these each as we go through the process, so we'll get more familiar with it. Oh, I should also note that MLA is typically used by literature and languages. The reason these things are set up differently, because I have a lot of students ask me, why do we have all these different styles? In literature and languages, certain things are important versus the sciences that will use APA or AMA, American Medical Association, American Psychological Association. In those fields, there are certain elements of their citations that are more important than others. For those fields, the date is excruciatingly important. Okay, they're looking at the newest items. In literature, not so much. Okay, I may be looking at a source from 1800s because I'm looking at the actual book that was written in the 1800s. So the date is not as important to us in literature and languages so much. So that's why it's not put up here. However, in other citation styles, for those fields, if the date is very important, you'll notice it's put more towards the front. Okay, so we've seen, again, container one, container two, it's what fits inside of what. Okay, we've talked about the punctuation. Another thing to note for each container, not every container is going to have every part of this. Okay, so if it doesn't have a contributor or a version, you just skip over that. Okay, so to kind of get this a little bit in the real world, we're going to have a practice article, and we're going to step through these pieces utilizing this practice article. So my article I'm looking at, I got from the database JSTOR, which is a very common database for humanities. It is a journal article versus a book chapter or a magazine article or a newspaper article. it has, here's my title right here, Poetry, Imagination, and Technical Writing. Here is the author, Russell Rutter. I've got the journal title here, College English, volume, issue number. And not every journal has a volume. Not every journal will have an issue number. Sometimes it's just a volume, and they only publish once or twice a year. So they will say volume 47 spring, however they do it. And then we've got some other information here. I've got a DOI, which we'll talk about in a minute, and we've got a stable URL. Okay, so part one, the author. And there are loads of different ways and different combinations this can go into. I'm hitting the high points. For more information, you really need to consult the MLA 9th edition handbook because it goes through every little key piece. When you present your authors, the first author listed on that item, if I had more than one author, they would be listed, but the first author is who it's put under, and it's going to be last name, comma, first name. So for our article, it's going to be Rutter, comma, Russell. Okay, and you spell out the first name. This is different from Sciences APA where they just use a first initial, but for MLA, we need the full name. The reason we put it under the last name, and this is very common in listing practices, is that there are more Russells than Rutters. Rutter last names, surnames are typically less common than first names, so it makes it easier to identify them. And you should also note that in MLA, your works cited page is done alphabetically by first author. If I've got two authors, then the way I do that is I do the same last name, comma, first name of the first author, then comma, and second author, just regular name style, first name, last name. And then I end it with a period. So that tells my reader, this is all of the author information I have. Okay, so you notice I separate them by comma, but once I'm done with all of the author information, I end it with the period. If you've got 3 or more authors presented, sometimes these things will have up to 5 or 6 authors. Then what you do is you put it under the first author listed, last name, comma, first name, just like we've done. Then you do comma, et al, period. Okay, et al means all of them. Okay, so that's how you would list it. Instead of listing out 20 authors, you just do the first author, et al. Okay, so now we have the title of the source. Again, this is still referring to my journal article itself. Okay, the actual item, you're pulling the ideas from specifically. And this gets confusing. I have a lot of students who will say, well, I'm looking at this book, and in this book, they pull this idea and they cite it from this other book. Oh, here, let me make this a little bit simpler. Okay, so I've got a journal article. They're citing this idea that I want to cite in my paper. They are citing from a book. So then do I cite the book or do I cite the journal article? And what I always tell my students is you cite exactly what it is you are looking at. If I'm looking at a journal article, I'm going to cite that journal article, not the book that the journal article is citing. Now, if I did go and get that book and then decide to cite from that book, then that's what I'm going to cite, okay, for my item. And you always make sure once you finish the entire title, you end it with the period. That tells your reader that's the title part. Journal articles are done in parentheses. Book titles, things like that, are done in italics. So we know which is which. If there's no title, and this is becoming more frequent with websites and things like that, if there's no title of the piece, Then you do a concise but informative description of the piece. Okay, so if I was referencing the artwork on an advertisement for Upton Tea Imports, then this is how I would phrase that. Okay. And I should note that on something like this, there may not be an author. The author is really more of the creator, who created the piece. So if I'm talking about art, that's going to be the artist. If I'm talking about music, that's going to be the composer. Okay. And sometimes with art pieces or a piece of advertisement, if again, I'm talking about the iconography of propaganda put out in World War II, I may have to do a description of the piece itself. But I'm going to do that. I'm going to make it concise. I'm going to make it very distinctive. And I'm going to end it with a period. Okay. So now we've got the title, our author, we've got our title of our piece. Now we start with the containers. Okay. And I pulled this from the handbook, but it kind of can show you like journals, magazines, newspapers. Those are going to contain articles. Okay. An anthology is going to contain essays, poems, or short stories. Okay. So this is what we mean. I'm looking at an article, the container is going to be the journal or the magazine or the newspaper. If I'm looking at a tweet, the container is Twitter. Okay. If I'm citing a piece of music that I got out of a streaming database, then that's going to be the song is going to be contained within the website, SoundCloud, what's that, Spotify, whatever place I'm pulling it from. Okay, so that's kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of what we mean by container. Okay, so let's look at container number 1. Okay, so remember, this is that next circle that it's growing. We've gone through our little item, which is our tiny little Russian doll, the tiniest. Now we're to the second one. So this one contains that particular item. Okay, the next layer. If it's a journal article, okay, that would be the journal itself. Okay. Again, not every container will have all of these parts. Okay, if it doesn't, you just skip over it. Make sure you separate the parts with a comma, and once you're done, you end it with a period. Okay, so for our article, our journal or our container number 1 is College English. That's the title of the journal. Okay, and I've got all of my journal information right here. Okay, so this is all the stuff that's separated by commas. Okay, so if we put it into this template, the title of the container is the title of the journal, College English. For this one, we don't have a contributor. A contributor means something like an editor or a translator, things like that. We don't have the version for this, but we do have the number. And this gets a little bit confusing because some of us remember when they used to say, okay, this is the volume, this is the issue number, things like that. Well, in MLA, they just call it the number. Whatever numbering system is given to that journal. Okay, so for this one that we're looking at, that we're practicing with, it's volume 47, issue number 7. Okay, and I separate them with commas. Make sure you put in your periods when you're abbreviating. We don't have necessarily a publisher for this. We do have the publication date, November 1985, comma. And for this one, let me move our little bar here. The location of it is the page number. Okay, so this is inside of that journal, College of English. We need to look for volume 47, issue number 7 from 1985. And these are the pages where my article is inside of this journal. Okay. Okay. So now we move on to container number 2. Remember, I ended container number 1 with a period. So that way my reader knows that's all this one container. College English, volume 47, number 7, 1985, pages, and I'm done. Now I'm moving on to container number 2. So where did I find this journal article? If I just found it in that print journal, then that's where I'm going to stop. If I found it in an online database, then the next layer, the next container is the database itself. So again, it may not have all of these things, so we just skip over them, separate the things that we do have by commas, and end with the period. So for this one, we know it's JSTOR. So that's my container, number 2. And then I have some other information to get them directly to the piece. So again, container number 2, the title of it is JSTOR. We don't really have any of this stuff, but we do have a location. Okay, and location for something like this could be a web address, the DOI number, or a stable URL. Typically speaking, if I've got a DOI number, and I just realized I misspelled that, so it is DOI, then what that is it's kind of like for journal articles, it's the number given to that specific journal article. So like books will have an ISBN number. This is kind of the ISBN number for journal articles. It started in the sciences. We're seeing it pick up in other areas. But what I like about this is that this links to this direct article. What if I'm a reader and I don't have access to JSTOR? Okay, so the stable URL is not going to help. A web address is not going to help. But if I take this DOI number, I can actually look for that article. It may be held in a different database like Web of Science. And if I'm at the library that has Web of Science, I can put in that DOI number and find that article in Web of Science as well. So my preference, and it depends on your professor, what they prefer, how they want it done, but my preference is typically a DOI number. Now that is saying in the humanities, not every article has a DOI number. Okay, again, this started in the sciences. Humanities is starting to catch up, but if you don't have a DOI number, then if you've got a stable URL, you can use that. If not, it depends on how your professor wants you to do it as to whether or not you just put in the title of the database and the date you accessed it, or just the title of the database. Okay, so with our example, this is what it would look like. Okay, so we've got our author, we've got our journal article title, and I just realized I didn't close up my parentheses like I should have. I've got the title of the journal in italics. I've got a comma. This is all my journal information. So I've got title, comma, number, date, and location, period. I'm done with that container. Now I've got container number 2, JSTOR, comma, and the DOI number. Okay. A few things to note. And I'm going to stop my share in just a second, but there's some different places that you can go to get some basic resources. We do, for UT Tyler, have a citation guide, and we have a tab specifically for MLA. I'll show you that in just a minute. It should also be linked into your subject research guides for whatever typical citation style you use for that subject. There is always the OWL Purdue. Usually, if I'm looking for something specific like MLA or APA or Turabian, I will just Google OWL Purdue and whatever citation style I'm looking for. That will take me straight to that main page. And then, as always, we actually have a copy of the handbook, the print handbook, on the ready reference shelf here in the library. That can get you into, sometimes you just get in the weeds with a lot of this stuff. It can get really complex. So, and ready reference books you cannot check out, so it should always be here unless somebody else is using it at the time, but it should always be here for you. So should you need it. Quick thing I want to show you on the OWL Purdue, and I'm seeing a lot of students getting very confused about OWL Purdue. I've had so many students where the professor says, oh, you can get your citation information on the OWL Purdue. And what they do is they come here and they think that's what this is. And they say, oh, I'm going to cite a journal article and I put my stuff in here and I click cite. And that's me going to the OWL Purdue. No. Okay, this is a citation generator. It is actually via citation machine. Okay, it really has nothing to do with OWL Purdue. Okay, with any online citation generator. Okay, they're an okay place to start. They're a horrible place to finish. You always need to double check it against the manual or come to OWL Purdue. And you can see where they've got all these different things that you can do. So if I'm checking my work cited, I can go in and click it and do the basic format, the basic rules, or I can say I'm wanting to cite a periodical, a journal article, things like that, things that come out periodically. Then it will give me that information. Okay, article in a newspaper. It shows me how to do that. A review. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you can get into. Okay. One quick thing about this is that in the OWL Purdue MLA, if you're citing an article that's in a database, typically that's seen as a web publication. Here, that's where they have it listed, including online databases. Okay, so that will give you that information. Okay. The other place I want to go to, I need to move our bar here. Okay, so if I wanted to get to the citation guide at UT Tyler Library, all I have to do, there's a couple of different ways I can do it. I can go to research guides by subject, and I can do all guides. I can do type. I can even come in here and type in citation, MLA, okay. MLA on the citation guide. And we've got all the different types up here. Or if I go to research guides by subject, and I just so happen to be in my literature and languages, it's a regular literature guide. Okay. Writing and citing. Okay, and it gives me different things that I can use and access. Are there any questions so far? Any questions at all?
None so far in the chat.
Okay. So another benefit is also if you are in Canvas, in the Canvas for a class, in that left-hand side menu, it will say library resources. If you click that, it will take you to the research guide for either that class or that subject. And then you can go into writing and citing. And that's another quick way to get there as well. Okay. Okay, well, that is all I have for today. If we don't have any questions, I am going to stop my screen share. And again, if you have any questions, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you have any questions, you can always contact the library. You can contact the Writing Center at UT Tyler. You can set up even like a Zoom meeting with them to go over your paper and look at your citations. If it's something very, very tricky, let's say it's 10 o'clock at night and you're trying to cite something and you're kind of in the weeds with it and you need access to the handbook, you can always call up here or hop on the chat and ask. We can typically help you out that way as well. Okay. And just reach out. There's all kinds of different ways that we can help you, but also we can direct you to the people that actually have the answer if we don't. Okay. Thank you.